Seasonality describes the differences between times of year, and of course in the north we're used to seasons being hot and cold, like summer and winter when you have snow in winter. But in Africa and in hot tropical countries generally, you find that the seasons are associated with different work patterns, different disease patterns, hunger. For example, just before the harvest you have the hungry season, and so it's a very difficult time of year for many poor people in particular. Seasonality was a big topic in development studies and policy in the 1970s and 80s, but it disappeared off the agenda. I think part of the general neglect of agriculture that we saw in the 90s and the early 2000s. So seasonality, which is a very big part of agricultural livelihoods, was neglected along with agricultural policy more generally, which was very unfortunate because it meant that a very important dimension of poverty and vulnerability was ignored for a very long time. One of the problems with not being aware of seasonality is we tend to think about averages, like we look at the poverty headcount in a country for a year, not realizing that actually it's very different depending on which time of year you do the assessment. So for example, if you take an assessment of poverty just after the harvest, it'll be much lower than just before the harvest. After the harvest, people are doing well and child malnutrition rates come down and so on. But before the harvest, people are struggling, food prices are very high, the granaries are empty, children are sick with diarrhea and malaria and so on, and it's a much poorer time of year. So seasonality actually makes poor people poorer. A number of things have changed since the 1980s when seasonality was first considered to be an important policy agenda. For example, HIV and AIDS has come and made a big difference to vulnerability of poor people. Climate change, of course, is making the seasons much more unpredictable, and that's a very important factor when you're looking at helping people survive bad years and so on. But also farmers themselves can't plan. They don't know if the rains are going to come, how long it's going to last. And so the seasons are becoming more unpredictable, and that makes people more vulnerable. So we're becoming aware again of how important seasonality is as a factor causing poverty and vulnerability.